how do you train specifically to build muscle? Let's talk about it.
Don't you want to look good naked?
When we're talking about training to build muscle specifically, which is also known as hypertrophy training, we want to make sure we're paying attention to a few things. So the first one is making sure that you're actually choosing exercises and movements that you can progress with. So this is referred to as exercise selection, and really just making sure that you're choosing the most efficient and effective exercises to focus on the main goal, which is to build muscle. So a few examples of exercises that may be not as efficient would be things like kettlebell swings, jump squats, wall sits, things like that. So those exercises aren't necessarily bad or wrong, or you shouldn't ever do them. But if we're talking about building muscle, we want to make sure that we're choosing exercises for that main goal in mind, and exercises that we can progress over time. And also exercises that don't have other limiting factors. If you're choosing a kettlebell swing to build your glutes, for example, you are probably going to give out on other muscle groups before your glutes give out when it comes to a movement like that, because there's a lot of either cardiovascular fatigue or other muscles might start to take over before your glutes fatigue. Things like jump squats and wall sits. A wall sit, again, it's not a bad exercise, but is it the most efficient to stimulate your quads to build muscle? Maybe not. The reason is because you are literally just sitting on the wall in an isometric contraction. So to build muscle in our quads, we want to make sure that we can bring our quads through its full range of motion, right? So flexion and extension of the knee. If we're doing a wall sit, we're literally just sitting there. And yes, you are, maybe you start to feel your quads burn the longer you sit there, but it's not going to be taking that muscle through its full range of motion, which we know is essential for building as much muscle as possible. And then when it comes to movements like jump squats, again, not a bad movement, but is that the best movement to choose for building muscle? Probably not. You're going to be fatiguing from a cardiovascular standpoint before your muscles fatigue. When it comes to building muscle, another thing to think about is making sure that you're getting close enough to failure and you're incorporating effective reps into your training. So all that means is when we're training to build muscle, we need to make sure we get close to failure, and a gauge for that is making sure that you're getting within 2 to 5-ish reps from failure. That's where the most effective muscle growth is going to occur. And so that's why we call those the effective reps. Something else to think about is making sure that you're training your muscles through their full contractile range of motion. So all that means is that we want to make sure that we're implementing different movements that aren't too redundant and that are making sure that we're targeting those muscles through their full range of motion, whether that's in the shortened position, the mid-range, or the lengthened. So a quick example of this, if we take a barbell glute bridge, for example, that's going to be training your glutes in the shortened contracted position versus an RDL is going to be training your glutes in more of that lengthened or stretched position. So we want to make sure that we're not being super redundant with the exercises that we're choosing in our programming so that we can hit the full range of motion of the muscle. Next, we want to make sure that we are hitting different regions of the muscles or the muscle fibers. So if we think about our muscles, some of our muscle groups are much larger than the others. So let's think of our lats. There's different regions of our lats. There's our upper, middle, lower lats. Same with our chest. There's upper, middle, lower chest. Our glutes, we have our glute max, our glute med, our glute min. So there's all different areas of those muscles, and we want to make sure that we're training different regions of them so that we hit the entire muscle. Let's take the lats, for example. So in order to train those different divisions, you can simply think of your different pulling motions or your rowing motions and how you can manipulate the angle of that pull to train those different regions. So for example, if you're looking to train your upper lats, thinking about a low to high pull. If you're thinking of training your mid-range of your lats, more of a horizontal pull or slightly lower to high pull. And then if you're looking to train the lower division of your lats, think of a pull down, so from high to low. When we're training to build as much muscle as possible, we also want to make sure that we're paying attention to tempo and time under tension. So this just means how long you're spending in that rep, right? So if we're thinking about a bicep curl, for example, when you're lowering that weight, instead of just dropping it down and letting your arm fall, you want to make sure that you're controlling that motion and that you're spending time with that bicep under tension. that is where muscle is built the most. So we know that from a scientific perspective, when we're talking about muscle growth, we need to create what's called mechanical tension. And all that means is creating as much tension within the muscle fiber as possible to get it to adapt and grow. When it comes to rep ranges for building muscle, from the research, we actually know that we can build muscle anywhere from 5 to 30 reps. But what is gonna be the most efficient for your time and where you're gonna get the most bang for your buck? Typically for most people, it's gonna be between that six-ish to 10 or 12 rep range, making sure that we're using heavy enough weights to get those effective reps, but not too heavy where that rep range becomes too low. Something else to think about when our goal is to build muscle is to just make sure that you're not thinking about moving a weight from point A to point B, right? Again, we wanna make sure that we're creating as much tension within that muscle tissue as possible. So think about that. Think about the tension you're creating and the buildup of that. And this might mean that you need to potentially reduce some of your weights. I know for me, when I was doing squats, for example, I would kind of let my ego take over and realize that, some of the heavier weights or the heavier loads that I was adding to that were causing me to just think about moving that weight from point A to point B as fast as possible, not necessarily creating as much tension in that muscle fiber as possible. And lastly, we need to think about other factors outside of the gym, right? Our nutrition, our recovery. Are we sleeping? Are we eating enough, right? All of these things matter when it comes to building muscle, because if you're putting a lot of work in the gym, but you're not focused on eating enough protein or eating enough calories in general, or sleeping or managing your stress, then you're doing a lot of work, but you're missing out on the actual place where the muscle is built, which is during your recovery, during your nutrition. So definitely make sure that you're paying attention to that. Women, we believe